Hi, everybody. Welcome to No Dumb Questions. My name is Christa of Practical Astros, and I'm here with longtime internet buddy Gabe Rosas. Gabe, thanks for joining me for a No Dumb Questions episode.
Thanks for having me. It's great. We get to chat about stuff.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk about astrology, especially with another astrologer instead of someone else who might like have their eyes glazing over or like be thinking about something else, or like have Homer Simpson have like just the monkey chimes. Um, Astrologers can be a little lonely in their conversations, and because astrology is a language among other things, it's just always fun to chat about it. So um, this today we're going to talk about bounds, which is one of the essential dignities, and it came from a question of what's the deal with twins fundamentally. How do you explain twins in astrology? And don't ask an astrologer that, because it's like, actually, let's talk about that. Essential dignities is a way to kind of show the loudness or the agency or the potency of a planet and a sign. We were talking before we recorded about the potential that the dignity of giving it a kind of a number value, like domicile is 5, exaltation is 4, triplicity is 3, bounds 2, and this sweet decans just get 1. That maybe it's just all a joke, maybe it isn't, but in this conversation we're going to talk about bounds and just how they operate in a chart. We have 2 chart examples of twins later on that we'll kind of use it as an example of. I got this table of planetary rulerships from the download off of the astrology podcast, so shout out to Chris Brennan and his team for making this, because it's something that I reference a lot. It's hard to remember the bounds because they're uneven, and it's not like with decans it's like the 10 degrees or the triplicity. It's like just pretty straight up. They're uneven, and I'll show on the next chart just like how uneven they are. Gabe, how do you always have to reference the chart? Like, do you remember certain degrees have bound placements? Because they do seem to be kind of, there is an order to them, but how many degrees from which sign they rule is quite varied.
Yeah, I've yet to memorize the bounds,
Yeah.
though it's been many years because they're irregular. It's harder. There's no like real trick
Yeah.
other than the general rule that at the end of the sign it's the malefics.
Yep.
Beginning of the sign is probably benefic or maybe like Mercury, and
Yeah.
you basically it's easy just to look at
Yeah.
or just to have it on the chart, which we're going to do later. So it
Yeah.
makes things a lot more easier to handle than having to. That's why there's computers.
Exactly. Thank you, computers. Just a general shout out. I it was like having the malefic rule the final degrees of a sign was like one of my earliest arguments against the idea that you're a cusp of like, well, if you're at the end of a sign, then how you're limited within the malefics is different than the beginning of the next sign, and there's so much more nuance to it. But it was one of the things that I learned is like, when you get to the end, you kind of have to do all the hard work of that sign. It's like, those are the tools you got to go through it before you can kind of move on to the next round. I guess we can go ahead and look at this. So bounds are kind of the nature of Saturn. They're like the tools or the parameters or the rules that are given. And Kira Ryberg on her blog has like a really beautiful write-up that she does about, if Saturn rules the house of Aquarius, in each of the rooms in that house, Mercury will have a place, Saturn will have his own room, Venus will have her room, Mercury will have their room. Like, everybody has their own rooms, but they're still under the umbrella of Aquarius. And it just shows about like, if the rules are set up by Saturn, by Aquarius, you can operate freely within your own room, but you still are kind of contained within that. How do you describe balance to people if you get into a conversation with like someone that's unfamiliar or just trying to understand a little bit more of like how it's expressed?
Well, there are a couple of ways. I mean, you mentioned the nature of Saturn. Part of me, well, part of how I learned about this, uh, being a student of Robert Schmidt years ago, was it's something more akin to the nature of Venus a little bit, because
Ah,
Venus is very particular about how things are done.
Mm-hmm.
And the word um, that is associated with the bounds, Roy, if I remember correctly, it gets translated to bounds or terms, but it almost can refer to like almost like a space that has been like set aside in a particular way.
Mm-hmm.
This is where terms come from. It's like an archaic meaning of terms. Like a plot of land is like technically a term of land.
Right.
And so there's this idea of it's this demarcated space where certain things can be done.
Huh.
So there's almost like there's also almost an analogy of like a part of a temple where there may be a particular shrine.
Mm.
So if like or church, like if you went to a Church of Saint Joseph, it's okay. There's a church. There's the usual things. There's an altar, and the crucifix, and there's over here there's a statue of the Virgin Mary, and over here there's a statue of Saint Joseph because it's Joseph's church, right?
Yeah.
And so there those are like little particular shrines within the greater uh, temple, setup. So the confines, the bounds, terms, they are like these very specific spaces within a sign
Mm-hmm.
defined in a certain way and drive certain kinds of behavior up. Another analogy that you could bring in is almost a grammatical analogy. If a planet was in a sign, planet is there to act. It's like the verb. It's like the verb of a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Is it acting on the domicile lord? It's like sort of the direct object of this verb, like what
Mm-hmm.
it's doing, and maybe the topic of the house that you're in is like the noun of this sentence. So the bound is sort of like the adverb,
Hmm.
sort of constraining how the the action is being done.
I
It's
like that. Yeah.
there's like a limit on it. So a planet in a bound, particular bound, it has to sort of behave in a certain way according to the ruler of that bound. It has to sort of follow that planet's rules in its space. Just like again, another analogy, if you're in someone's house, but the house has different rooms in it, you're in so and so's room, you can't just do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
So and so's room. Um, you act differently there than you do if you're in the living room.
Yeah.
So it's that sort of thing.
I like the Venusian idea of like when you mentioned the church, like going to St. Joseph's Church, there's like an etiquette to it. It's like the
Yes,
expectation to behave given the context that you're in, which isn't like physical limitation. Because when we think of being bound or being constrained or it feels Saturnian. It's like this is what you got. Like these are the tools
exactly.
that I provide you. But to think of it as like etiquette and even just like a social construct of like we expect you to behave this way because of the situation that you are in of what I've provided for you. It's like you can't really like if you're in a church or if you're in a temple, there's only so much resource that's there because there's so much that's not. But the expectation given the context that you're at has been provided for, and to get other things you kind of maybe have to work harder for it. So yeah, I like that. So we're going to look at um, it's not a secret of who we're talking about, but I won't reveal it just yet. We're going to talk about twins and that were born 5 minutes apart, and one of them is famous, so they're observable. It's a celebrity, it's an actor, and they have a twin brother that was born 5 minutes later. And so their ascendants are the same. They're 2 degrees apart, so they're within the same sign, the same decan. They have the same ruler of their chart. They have the same moon placement. I mean, it's only 3 minutes separate. Like, a lot of twin charts will be like 5 minutes apart. Sometimes they'll have a different rising sign. Sometimes the transits will just hit them one sooner than the other. But this one in particular was kind of potent because the ascendant for twin A is in the bounds of Venus. The ascendant for twin B is in the bounds just barely of Mars. And so I pulled these because twin A has a very different experience than their twin B. And we can look at the condition of that bound ruler and just the rest of the chart and like how it's expressed to kind of look at just how much nuance there can be in twin charts, because it's an old argument of trying to disprove astrology by looking at twins and be like, well, they're born at the same time, in quotations, but they live very different lives. And there's lots of nuance we can look at. And talking about the bounds is just one way to kind of give an example of. So, can I just get your hot takes on these charts? I know I sent them to you before, but just like looking at them now, kind of what stands out to you?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of things going on in Aquarius. They
Mm-hmm.
have this, huge stellium in Aquarius. So they're definitely getting out into the world, and with that sort of emphasizes what Saturn's doing. So obviously, these people are very home and sort of family oriented people.
Mm-hmm.
They benefited from whatever sort of situation they came from. They were not, necessarily they were not suffering in their youth. Um, they're obviously communicative people. They seek knowledge. They seek religion or education. Uh, they are definitely involved in the public eye. They definitely acquired some fame. Obviously, one differently from the other.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, other than the one, but everything is literally the same. They would almost have the same,
Yeah.
except for the one little thing that is different, which is the terms that the ascendant is in.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, the famous actor is in a way a very lucky person. I mean, he mentions and you I love that you picked this particular quote
Yeah.
because from looking into the life, this is a very astoundingly lucky person
Mm-hmm.
in terms of just how he sort of hit it off in his career. But even before then, he was doing very well. He got into trouble, I think, when he was very young. He like burgled his school
Yeah.
and got caught, so he wasn't that lucky. But he got he lost scholarships and yeah, he was on probation and all that, but he didn't go to jail. It didn't upend him, and not too terribly long after that, his actual acting career had started.
Mm-hmm.
So he seems very fortunate. He's also very fortunate when it comes to women. I think this is again the
Mm-hmm.
influence here. Um, uh, in one particular instance, a particularly older woman, uh, and then after that, again, another seemingly very well established marriage after that.
Mm-hmm.
So he seems to benefit a lot from that, and also there's like a religious influence with that too.
Mm.
It sort of guided his sort of religious journey. These two wives of his that he's had. So there's that
Is
influence.
he a Scientologist?
No, this
What are
person,
they?
I think they got interested through the first wife through that this sort of like the Hollywood Kabbalah stuff,
Oh, okay.
Kabbalah Center that's out there in LA. So
Yeah.
it's sort of vaguely new agey. It's a weird. It's like it's not standard Kabbalah, right? But
Which is like Venus in the ninth house in Aquarius. It's like that sentence.
exactly. There's
Yeah.
there's that and there's
Yeah.
obviously that, but then I think in the current marriage he has not quite converted to Judaism, but
Mm.
he's in that sphere where he's um very dialed in
Yeah.
to the Jewish faith.
Yeah.
So, which is
Yeah.
interesting. They're born Catholic. So,
Yeah. I mean, just the luck piece of it, like, how did I get to be this lucky? I mean, he's
yeah,
also kind of escaped like tragic things, like by the skin of his teeth, kind of unbeknownst to him.
yeah,
I mean, he's had to deal with like legal things of being witness to, a person that was murdered like hours after he saw her. I mean,
yeah,
just really like kind of being held. And if you look at just Venus as a benefic and the nature of a benefic versus the nature of a malefic is like
yeah,
the bound ruler between these. We'll look at the first house as body and like the moon and like kind of what his twin had to deal with, but just on the malefic and benefic nature alone, it's like it seems pretty loud of like being really fucking lucky, like kind of out of like, his soul chose this moment to come out a little bit early, before his brother, and has some charm, not without difficulty, but just I think I would wrestle with it too, of like, how did I get to be so lucky?
Mm.
And possibly the twin of like, how did I get to be so unlucky? Seeing somebody that you share a life with having very vastly different experiences, but then also being able to kind of uh, be a part of the good experiences because you have a twin that is successful in that way.
Yeah. I mean, with twin, again, from looking into this, from what I understand, they didn't think the mother did not think she was pregnant with twins. They only knew of the first one,
Wow.
and as the labor progressed, they were like, "Oh, wait a minute, there's another baby," and so they brought it out, and the twin was much smaller than they should have been,
Mm-hmm.
uh, sickly from the get. And this is where we see the big difference of the bound rulers. Uh, Twin having Mars as the bound ruler of the ascendant as opposed to Venus, and Mars being determined to illness in general in this
Mm-hmm.
chart because it rules the sixth, um, and being in not great condition at all, being in its fall in the second. Um, Sort of not really getting any sort of aspect from any benefic or anything like that. So generally not a very good Mars to begin with. And we could
Yeah.
see how this differs because okay, the famous the Star Brother, you know, committed a burglary, got caught, but didn't really get punished.
Mm-hmm.
Or they got involved, like you said before, uh this person they were dating an hour after they talked to them, this person was killed by some sort of serial killer or something.
Yeah.
So, like skin of his teeth there. Uh, Getting involved in controversy with other people he was associated with closely in his
Mm-hmm.
career that uh, brought him, some sort of ire publicly, but
Mm-hmm.
again, no real consequences.
Yeah.
Uh, More scandal and stuff like that. And he's had this thing where he gets involved in or he gets mixed up in things and manages to get out scot free, but he ends up getting some sort of social backlash.
Yeah.
Whereas the brother had absolute physical backlash.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, you know, cerebral palsy, diagnosed when he was not even 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Having a heart transplant, needing a heart transplant when they were 11 or 12,
Yeah.
and then getting a blood clot not too many years after that. And that seems to be like the worst of it, in terms of health wise. But I mean, that's a person who's like barely escaping adolescence, uh,
Mm-hmm.
with all these sort of awful sort of challenges, maladies.
Yeah.
Brother coasting on air, basically.
Yeah.
So uh, very fortunate for him. But then it changes the motivation too of the life. So
Mm-hmm.
the twin who has suffered all this, illness, becomes an advocate for the chronically ill.
Yeah.
And this is like another aspect of Venus now, although he doesn't have it as a term ruler, but because it's so prominent in the chart and Venus ruling the fifth, that brings the idea of being an advocate, which also the Star Brother also has their sort of advocacy that they've done in the course of their work,
Mm.
primarily being brought through, by one or the other of his wives.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for the twin B, the motivation has been like having to overcome all these terrible illnesses
Yeah.
and advocating with chronic health.
Yeah. I mean, something that came up when I was thinking, because I didn't know about twin B. I didn't know that the Star Brother had a twin,
Mm.
but the Star Brother, when he came to fame initially, like the word that came up was like heartthrob, like he was like, visually just like attractive, and had that kind of like that heart attraction. And then looking at, the heart in the zodiac man, it's Leo, and you got Saturn, out of home in Leo, and that Saturn really close to the IC in Leo, and just the heartthrob name for the star brother. But then the twin B had heart transplant and open heart surgery. Again, like these different expressions of like what it means for like the energies of the heart. Like in
Mm.
Chinese medicine, the heart stores joy, it expresses joy. And like how like the damage and the injury and the surgery of the heart versus like the expression on like more of an archetypal way of like being somebody that is like warm and funny and friendly and joyful and like popular and like all those like qualities of Leo, but it's like expressed so differently with that Leo third house with Saturn and the IC there. Another word that came up when I was looking at twin B was, after time, which is also kind of a Saturnian thing, kind of really coming through and coming through the, why me sort of like obvious thing that you would think of like if you see your twin having a very different experience than you're going to take it personally. We tend to take bad luck more personally than good luck. We think good luck happens to us, but that we deserve bad luck on some level. And as he was working through that, he came to that, okay, he's going to be open about his cerebral palsy and be that advocate and be that champion. And the word courage kept coming up in interviews that I was reading, and courage is such a Leo thing. It's that courage through you're not courageous because it's easy. You're courageous because it's hard and you still choose to go forward. You still choose to be a champion, or you still choose to act on what is heart centered. And it was just cool to see that different expression, that the easy life twin might have this, but the harder life twin through that harder life has kind of come through and brought things that you only get through adversity. And when I talked with Dorji of Heart Astrology about twins, he said that there's some traditions that think that twins, the spiritual like life of twins is that they come into this world because they either were lovers in a previous life or that one killed the other. And I like to think about like in this context, like it seems like they really are bound with love. Like that it doesn't seem like a lot of antagonism against each other, that it's that Venus Mars relationship, of that tension of really wanting to come together, and that these twins are very close. They're best friends. They've been allies for each other. And they're not kind of pitted against each other, even though they probably, twin B would have every reason to resent his brother just witnessing his positive experience versus his own negative experience.
Another angle that we can throw in here. Also, one thing that we should also note is that Saturn and Venus, they're all also in Mars bounds. And so I think there's a theme here.
Oh yeah.
We can start reading here. Star is really famous for being on a show set in the past, very Saturnian thing, where he's basically a giant obnoxious clown.
Yeah.
So there's definitely this Saturn is clowns kind of vibe. It's public character, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the twin B, it's everything he's doing is sort of, he's been very active. I think sort of he didn't do it when he was very young. I think it was probably around when he was like 30-ish. Like, around that Saturn return thing was when he became more active in advocacy. And it's obviously done in the background. It's very quiet. He's not a super public figure. It's the most public thing. The thing about him is he's this person's brother.
Right.
But he's been quietly doing this work for many years now. So it's sort of him chugging along and doing all this stuff in the background without drawing a lot of attention to himself. I think it's doing the Saturnian thing of digging into the work.
Yeah.
And just, grinding things out.
Yeah. Saturn approved for sure. I hadn't caught that that Venus is in the bound of Mars.
Yeah.
Saturn is in the bound of Mars.
Yeah. Their MCs are in the bounds of Mars. So there's definitely, and Fortune, I think Fortune's in the bounds of Mars for both of them.
Yep.
So there's definitely a heavy sort of that influence all throughout their lives. Just that that one little tweak changes things a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we look at, so Mars is exalted in Capricorn, so it's fallen in Cancer. It's fallen here. It's in the bounds of Jupiter. Um, and it's retrograde, but it can't see either of its rulers. It can't see its exaltation ruler, Jupiter.
Yeah.
It can't see the moon. And so there is that massive disconnect of second house of, the skills and resources that you have to kind of ascend to that first house. And it seems like twin A really does rely on the luck, maybe on purpose at this point, but accidentally growing up, of other people, of just really being held by the fates of, of other people helping them. And that twin B just wasn't as lucky in that sense. Maybe in the immediacy wasn't as lucky, but having that the bound ruler be retrograde in fall, and blind to its both of its rulers here does speak to just kind of not being held, not being protected, not being guided, versus twin A, the star brother, which now he will forever be called in my head whenever I see him on TV. Venus is there. It's it can see it by Venus can see by from the ninth house, almost, within 4 degrees of trining the ascendant. It can see its ruler, Mercury, and it's so much more supportive. I mean, the trine is that supportive nature, and so it's co-present with both luminaries with that new moon, in the ninth house. It just seems like subjectively way more luckier, just on that alone. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. He's very fortunate. Another thing we can throw in here, Mars being in the second place, having this one of its connotations being like things that support the life, right? That sort of hold of life to the point of like it could literally be manservants or those kinds of assistants that are literally like helping you directly as like a personal assistant type person, but also just very close people or circumstances.
Yeah.
And you can see how it's different where the Star Brother somehow is man, even though this is not a great Mars, he's still getting support through other people, maybe the people not necessarily the most trustworthy, upstanding sort of people. As anyone can see, some people he's been associated with are shady, for the lack of a better word. Whereas the other brother really having to deal with illness and it's not really support at this point. It's like it's the kind of sort of endurance and things that they've had to endure through their life. But at the same time, it provided motivation for him. So he was able to do something with it. It wasn't just horrible things happening to him.
It wasn't just suffering.
Wasn't just suffering.
Yeah.
He adapted to the suffering and was able to try to turn it into something helpful for other people.
Yeah. Which seems like Saturn, work again. There is a lot of Mars influence, but I mean, clearly with all that stuff in Aquarius, it's a very Saturnian. Both of them are very Saturnian charts. But yeah, that endurance, it's like that's the nature of Saturn. Like you just gotta fucking endure it. Like there's just survival in the end, and you will be fortified. It's Mars is to be overcome. So it's like that those challenges to be overcome. I think it's a good point to just highlight like the shady characters of maybe the people around you don't have the best intentions, or are doing things just for their own self-interest under the guise of maybe supporting you, being there in that second house for both of them. But yeah, do you want to reveal the star brother?
Sure. It's Ashton Kutcher.
Which his first name is Chris, and I guess that's what his family calls him. I never knew that beforehand.
It's probably one of those weird actor things where there's some actor was already Chris.
Yeah.
And so you can't use that name. So he's like, oh, I'll just use the middle name then.
Yeah, or Chris is just such a common name.
Yeah.
That they like, well, Ashton is different. It's memorable for the.
It almost sounds like old Hollywood.
Yeah.
It's like a Barrymore kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah. So star brother is Ashton Kutcher, and his twin brother here on the right. So
Michael. It's Michael.
Michael.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of his name. The quote that I put down there for Ashton was, "How did I get to be this lucky for my brother to be born with cerebral palsy, then have a heart transplant, then have this random blood clot? You're like, who has to go through that?" And for Michael, so Ashton kind of outed his brother accidentally of his cerebral palsy. He hadn't announced it himself.
Mm.
And he at first, Michael was upset that he was like exposed because he was a very private person compared to his brother. But then, and it caused some discord between them. But then he said it brought up the shame. I realized I needed to let go of the shame I felt to be a champion for people with cerebral palsy. I was finally able to ready to tell my story, and I knew because of my twin, I'd have big reach. He did me the biggest favor because he's allowed me to be myself. That quote was not typed correctly. The biggest favor he's because he allowed me to be myself. Yeah, that was a mistake.
It's in there.
Yeah.
Mercury got you.
Yeah, Mercury is it's direct, so it's just my fault at this point. um, all right, so let's go back. Or what's this one? Oh, this is the chart figure. I guess I could have had that up. Let's go back to this. And if you will just kind of give your advice on if you're looking at your nativity or the nativity of someone else and you see something in the bounds, I mean, you can have reception with bounds, but how would you like what's an elevator pitch of how you use bounds or how you would suggest to other people use bounds when reading charts?
Well, I would note, after you've already figured out what the planet is doing in the general sense,
Mm-hmm.
of what it's being determined to do, based on the place it's in and what its own nature is, and how it relates to whatever domicile lord or other planets. This is another relation where I would actually even before looking at aspects, I would look at something like this, like the bounds, and see how okay the planet is going to act on certain things based on where the domicile lord of the sign it's in,
Mm-hmm.
the way it has to behave, the way it has to be constrained, it's going to be based on what this bound ruler is and where that whatever that bound ruler is doing in the chart. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another interrelationship you have to like make note of. Um, are the natures agreeable or not? Is it in its own bounds, which means that it has like a sort of freedom of action. It can kind of do what it wants to do in a way not dissimilar to being like in its own, if a planet's own sign, it's like it's in its own house, so it doesn't really have to answer to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
If it's owns, if it's like in its own man cave or analogous, some sort of analogous thing inside your own home, now it's like, there's no restriction. It can behave in a very um, undetermined way, which is good or bad depending on who it is,
Right.
what else is going on, right? Um, but yeah, again, if it's a planet that's like in a place that's not conducive for its nature, if it's the opposite sign from where it rules, but if it's but if it's in its own bounds, it has an advantage there where it may not be entirely comfortable where it is, but it found a spot. It found a spot where it's good and
Yeah.
it can behave in its own way, and so it will try to produce what it promises in a manner more conducive to its nature, uh,
Yeah.
but without as much sort of difficulty as if it was completely without any dignity at all, where it's
Right.
sort of at the mercy of whatever help it can get.
Yeah. What about the luminaries? So, can you explain why the luminaries aren't bound lords?
There's a story that supposedly comes from Persia where, in one sense, the zodiac is sort of split in half between the sun and the moon. Like the part that has Leo in it, that's the sun side, and the part that has Cancer in it is the moon side.
Mm.
Um, and they decided for whatever reason to divvy up um all the subdivisions. And when they came up with this subdivision, the bound, like they wanted to split things up, they sort of gave their portions to other planets.
Huh.
They sort of like this is that story. Now, if you actually look at texts, there are versions of bounds with the sun and moon in them.
Hmm.
No one ever uses them because there's so many versions of the bounds.
Yeah.
Um, but for whatever reason, everybody ends up using the Egyptian bounds or what
Hmm.
are called the Egyptian bounds, and that's pretty much the way it's been in the Western tradition forever.
Yeah.
In India, I'm not sure what happens in Jyotish. I think there are analogous divisions to the bounds, but I don't know how well they're used. And also, that's a whole huge tradition in and of itself. So there's probably multiple strands of
Yeah.
contradictory versions. So
Yeah. One argument I've heard is that because the luminaries either emit or reflect light, like there's no limiting that. Like
yeah,
you can't kind of put that in a parameter, but using your um, you know, suggestion of it being more Venusian and kind of like the etiquette is what I said.
mm,
Um, light could still participate in that. But I haven't found something that's like definitive of like that makes sense of why the luminaries are not. It's just it's a rabbit hole that I haven't lost my head in yet.
yeah. Some of it's sort of lost to time a little
Yeah.
bit. And
Yeah.
so for us to like sort of either rediscover it or just reconceptualize it and try to make a narrative that makes sense to us.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Gabe. Do you want to share? Actually, yeah, what I can do is share your website right here.
Yay! Well, this is my website. So if you want me to read your chart or what have you, this is how I can contact it through gabrielrosasastrology.com. I have booking links and contact links and all that there. So that would be the easiest way.
Great. And I'll put this in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining the conversation and for being a guest on No Dumb Questions.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Like and subscribe.